All right, so before we get started with this project, the first thing I need you to do is to actually switch this with this. All right, so this gear right here, I need to go onto this motor. So I've already removed the collars on the end, so I'm just going to pull this one off. Pull this one off. And I don't really need this one anymore. All I really need is my gear. I do need a spacer to go on here. So spacer, and here's my gear. All right, there we go. Now notice this should, if it doesn't already, have video, have one of these, it's called standoffs on both sides. Okay, so it should have standoffs on both sides if you did that correctly. If not, make sure you add that. We're going to need it here. All right, so everything we're going to do for this program, this is our last test bed program, is going to be dealing with this motor and this gear. That's it. Okay. All right. So our lesson today, and this is our last one of our test beds, is called open and closed loop systems. Okay. And they use a clothes dryer as an example of the difference between a closed loop and an open loop. Okay. So a closed loop is just a program that runs for a specific amount of time, or at least a specific amount of times. All right, so something does something 30 times, or maybe it does it for 20 minutes or whatever. That's a closed loop program. It does something and then it stops. All right, so they give example of your clothes dryer. You can put it on a cycle to run for a certain amount of time, like they said 45 minutes. Okay, at the end of those 45 minutes, your clothes might be dry. They might not be dry. They might be super, super dry. It's just the dryer just ran for 45 minutes and then stopped. Okay. Now, a lot of clothes dryers now have another type of cycle you can do where they actually use moisture sensors, and you can set it to be more dry, less dry, or somewhere in the middle. Okay. And if you do this, then the dryer is running, but it doesn't run for a certain amount of time. It runs until those sensors tell it. So it says those sensors tell it that the clothes are dry, and then the dryer stops running. So that means if you put it on the same setting, two different loads of clothes might take two very different amounts of times, because one load might have taken longer or shorter amount of time to dry than the other. This is an example of a closed loop system. A closed loop system is running based on feedback. So it's getting feedback in the as it's running. Okay, so for our clothes dryer, that feedback is from the moisture sensors. So we're going to learn, we're going to use two different programs. We're going to do a closed loop program and an open loop program, and both are going to be dealing with this gear turning. All right, our first one is actually super easy. It says write a program that will oscillate the motor 0.5 seconds each way 20 times. Okay, a couple different ways you can do that. I would suggest trying to use your variables. We learned variables in the previous one. So set up a program, use variables. Now, for this entire lesson, I am not going to show you my program on Robot C. I'm going to show you it run. So I'll actually switch to full screen video for both of these. And I need you to figure out how to make the program run. Okay. Nothing we do here should be new. Okay. So we're using things that we've already learned how to do. All right, so I'm going to start my program to do the first part, and this is where the motor should turn for half a second, stop, turn for half a second the other direction, stop, and then you should repeat that 20 times. Now, as you're doing your program, make sure that you do make your motor stop with some kind of wait time after it does. The motor should not turn one direction and then immediately turn the other. It's really bad for the gears inside the motor. All right, so let's see if this works. One, 2, 3. There we go. That was 20. Now, one problem you may have noticed is that this thing right here slowly worked its way around, meaning that it was turning and then turning, but it was turning, we'll say counterclockwise more than it turned clockwise. Okay, and so that meant that this right here kept slowly getting out of position. So it wasn't just turning back to the exact same position. Even though on my code I have it should have turned back to the same position both times. It was turning counterclockwise more than it turned clockwise, and that made that thing drift every so slightly around my circle as it was going back and forth. That's important when we get to our next part. All right, so for our next part, I need to take, let's see, share screen real quick. Share screen. All right, so I need to make the program oscillate both ways 20 times, just like I did before. But this time we're making it an open loop program, meaning it should get feedback in the middle. So it says one direction will use the limit switch sensor input, whereas it goes the opposite direction for just 0.5 seconds. Okay, so what does that look like? So, stop sharing. So right here, I'm going to take my limit switch. I've already detached it. And I'm going to attach my limit switch right about here. Okay, just turn my camera over a little bit so you can see what's going to happen. This is why we need that standoff. So all I'm going to do is I'm telling it the program to turn this direction until it hits my limit switch. And I need to make sure I angle my limit switch so that it'll click. You need to hear that click. So I need to turn mine probably a little more so that it'll click maybe right about there. All right, I heard it click. And then as soon as my limit switch clicks, it should turn the other direction. And it should turn the other direction for half a second and then come back until my limit switch clicks. Okay, so I'm going to pause the video. I'm going to try to attach my limit switch right here using a screw, and then we'll see if my program works. All right, so I have it set up. I ran it to test it, and there's an issue. So let me point out my issue. And my issue is not with my program, but rather how I have my limit switch set up. So let me show you what the problem is. This. All right, see, it's going past my limit switch. Well, that time it worked. Oh, see, I went past my limit switch. Oh, and now it's not even triggering my limit switch. All right, so if you have that issue, your program's not your problem. It's probably your limit switch, or you're making this spin too fast. So I'm gonna go back and see if I can move my limit switch, and also if I can tighten it up a little bit so it doesn't move. But if that doesn't work, that means I probably need to slow my program down a little bit. All right, so I moved my limit switch, and then I ran into another problem. See if I can move this a little closer. You can see what my problem is. No, my camera's not very good. Let's see. Let's start program. Goes around, triggers it, and then hits it. And so my limit switch actually stops it from turning. So it triggers it, but it's going too fast. So that means that my motor's just going too fast for this to work. So I'm going to go in and try to slow down my motor's speed. All right, so I played around with it for a little bit. And by play around, I mean I was playing with the speeds. Speed one way to speed the other. So I want the speed going towards my limit switch to be slow enough that it has time to click it, turn on, realized it needs to stop and stop before it passes it. So I had to slow it down that direction a lot. I tried slowing both of them down, and then it just didn't do a whole lot. So I had to figure out, okay, how fast do I want it to go the other direction? I don't want it to go too far because then that whole drifting thing can come in. All right. So played around with my speeds, and this is what I got as far as my best speed. So download. So it's going to turn, click, go the other way. That was 2, 3, All right, if I counted right, this should be the last one. Yep, there we go. Perfect. All right, 20 times. All right, so that's what you need to do. It took a little playing around with, but I think you can figure that out.